Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. This is going to be a very special episode. If you listened to episode 5, you might remember Susanna Penfield, an inheritor and a redistributor, whose story really centered around the relationship that she had with her grandma and especially with her mom. And so in this episode, we actually brought Susanna's mom, Annie, into the conversation. So this will be an interview with the both of them to talk more about Annie's side of the story. Annie Penfield lives, works, and writes in rural Stratford, Vermont, which has a population of about 1,000. After 22 years as the proprietor of Stratford Saddlery, she shifted her role from tack shop owner and saddle fitter to focus on community actions, climate repair, and land justice. As board member of the Stratford Community Trust, she works to strengthen our rural economies through hybrid ownership models and preserve the places that hold community together. At this time, the focus is the purchase of their general store. Annie is a graduate of the Vermont School of Fine Arts, and she has had work published in several literary journals. Twice named notable by Best American Essays, her writing practice provides opportunity to explore her awe for the natural world and consider how we rise from life's falls. Her children have challenged how we invest our money for what kind of future we envision. With them, she works to support efforts of regenerative economies and to shift the flow of capital and power to solve social and environmental problems. She has gratitude for the places that she calls home, seeks to repair systemic harms, and revels in the bounty of nature and family. And as a reminder, or for those who might be tuning in for the first time, Susanna Penfield works as the Director of Relationships at Chosen Family Office, where she facilitates connections between wealth holders and financial professionals in support of the social movement-driven wealth redistribution. She is a co-leader in the Vermont chapter of Resource Generation, alumni of the Just Economy Institute, and is a certified trauma of money practitioner. Susanna is also an inheritor who, alongside her mom, Annie, liberated family assets to be redistributed and reinvested into community. And that story I will link to in the show notes. It's episode 5, where we talk about trust busting. Susanna was born and raised in Vermont, and she now lives with her partner in Albuquerque, New Mexico. All right, welcome, Annie and Susanna. I am so thrilled to have you both on the show today to share a little bit more about your dual story and to hear a little bit more about your side of the story too, Annie. Susanna knows this, but for folks on the show, I generally ask them to share about their money story as a way to introduce themselves. So I will hand it over to you first, Annie, to share your money story. And then Susanna, if you have anything that you didn't share on episode 5 that you want to share more about, I'll hand it over to you. But Annie, could you share a little bit more about your own money story and how it shaped your life?
Hello, yes. And I'm delighted to be here and so excited to be here in the role of Susanna's mom, offering another generational perspective on this. So I know that when Susanna appeared with you, Jordan, that she spoke a lot to my dad and gave a lot of the bigger family background and generational story. So I'm going to focus on myself and begin with me. I grew up in a deck house, a prefab kip home, which was the house my father could afford to build on his father-in-law's property in the 1970s when he got his job on State Street in Boston. As a child, I loved playing in the woods, And as a result, I've always placed high value on open space and feel the privilege of acreage and the responsibility of taking care of the land. Next door to us, my grandfather lived in a great stone house through the trees. Like that house, I was aware of the weight of a family history of achievement. My dad, as the younger son, did not inherit the family lands in Austria, but he found his calling in the commercial real estate markets, and he steadily progressed in his earnings, and this was reflected in improvements to our home and our vacations throughout my teenage years. I attended an elite boarding school in Massachusetts, as was the family tradition, but went to a state university in Vermont. I had no idea of my father's worth. In fact, on my college roommate inquiry form, I left the income line blank, and as a result, I was placed 3 in a double, and they both were scholarship students. When I graduated from college and moved to live with my boyfriend in California, I lived off his Navy salary. Soon we got married, and when he got out, we bought our first home in very small house in rural Vermont with the savings from his military career. During his law school years, when I was 30, I had a child, Susanna. My father sold his company and set up a trust fund, and I began to shift into the role of provider. With the career change, it was good timing. The interest from the trust fund became our primary income during this transition. Several years later, we built a home in Stratford with the help from my dad and the proceeds from the sale of our first home. This is where I still live today. Susanna was just entering school and now had a younger sister and brother. Kent decided to set up a law practice in town, and I realized I needed a job to support my lifestyle with horses. So again, with my dad's help, I bought a small tack shop and worked in service to the horse community for over 20 years. I know I am so fortunate to have the bank dad, but from him I also learned how to advocate for myself and make a case for an expenditure or an investment. 2 years before he passed away, my father did a wealth distribution. I was able to increase my philanthropy and travel. There was breathing space in my budgets. It didn't need my day job. Could have gone out of business, but I felt a responsibility to my employees and to the horse community. Also, I was building something. I was modeling for our kids, and it was part of the ethic from my achievement-driven family. When my father passed away, I inherited more wealth. My kids left home, and my interest in the business shifted. Now I ask myself questions about the world I wanted to see, and I wanted to work on that vision. And I was having those conversations with my children. So really, I came into a new level of wealth at the same time as my kids, but obviously at a completely different stage of life. And that's where I am today.
Before I ask you a few more questions about that, Susanna, anything that you want to add to your own money story, or just maybe for listeners who haven't had a chance to listen to your own money story, is there any like Cliff Notes versions that you would want to share?
I'm so glad to be back, and I'm so glad to be here with my mom because it really is like a completely entwined money story. I appreciate sort of the generational skipping that we just did because I started talking about what I've learned about my grandfather and his childhood, which came through all the work that my mom had done and the conversations she had with him because I didn't really get to have an adult relationship with my grandfather. And so learned about how he was relocated from Austria during World War II with his mom, who then left. And he really did also model that same work ethic that I watched my mom exhibit through my entire childhood, running this small business. That was a core piece of our town and the community I grew up in. I think that, to me, is the model of a money story is not about what you're earning and the material wealth that comes with it, but how you're in relationship with the people in your community. And the fact that Mom ran this store in our 1,000-person town, and all of our neighbors and all the other townspeople who didn't even have horses knew about it and knew how to engage with it, represented something that I think I continue to seek out and replicate. So this idea of just being place-based and building a sense of what can I offer back to people? What can they offer to me? You know, the reciprocity that came through watching my mom run this small business is really important and is a way I think we think about now this responsibility to having wealth that my grandfather earned now accessible and something that we can make decisions around. I'm just really happy to get to share the conversation.
Thank you. And Annie, in your money story, and also in what I've heard of Susanna's, and it helps that Susanna and I are friends, so I've heard a lot of different aspects of it. But really hearing core themes around hyper-local or place-based, being of service, and even the wealth that your father made through his own entrepreneurship, how that ultimately enabled you to do more with gifting, with philanthropy, and thinking about the life that you want others to have, including your children. And I'm curious because it sounds like at the core, a lot of the values and principles that you both brought in are very similar. And I know it wasn't necessarily a super smooth process when Susanna started bringing up the conversation of redistributing her inherited wealth. So, how did it feel for you when Susanna came to you and shared her vision of what she wanted to do with her inheritance?
Well, initially I panicked. So, but before that moment of panic, I was fascinated with her process. She joined Research Generation at that time and was working with a money coach. And she kept calling. She was living in Colorado, and I'm still in Vermont. And she kept calling with these questionnaires she was working on about class and privilege, and she had spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets were broken down into categories, and the categories were related to ancestry, and I was fascinated by all of that. So I was very comfortable with the process and the questioning and completely engaged in that. She comes from a very civic minded family that is very dedicated to community. So a lot of that was familiar territory. When I began to understand she literally wanted to give away all of her money, I panicked. I struggled with her idealism in the face of my realism. While her pursuit was noble, it felt reckless to me in the uncertainty of the future. That created more conversations between us. I shared my fears and concerns. We're a family that doesn't keep secrets. And her response to my fears and concerns was panic on her part. I could see her stress. This inheritance had created this upheaval in her identity and her beliefs. While total redistribution troubled me, I understood the other big drivers for her. The money was invested in extractive industries with underpaid workers and overpaid CEOs. The money was driving an exploitation that philanthropy was working to repair. And did I really want to be complicit to an industry that was creating harm to the planet? And how would I face future generations knowing I did nothing to arrest the harm? She had done a lot of research into public marketplace where our money was invested. She also had done a lot of research into community funds, and she showed a way to invest differently. These options were not extractive, but they had, of course, lesser return, which had gone against what I'd been raised. But the return on humanity and the climate was great value to me personally. And then, as we explored these options and then ran into this issue of not having the control of our money in order to make these changes to our investments, I was fully on her side with that, as were her brother and her sister. And we all formed a collaborative in order to make a change. So it really was one step at a time. And those initial steps I really believed in. And I just trusted the process. And we started it on the just one step at a time to move towards these goals.
Susanna, do you want to say anything in response to that?
Yeah, I think I just want to go back to the beginning and this idea of panic, because in my money story, I talk about the fact that I had grown up in this small town and had shaped a sense of self that was not reliant on having luxury or excess wealth. And so when I opened this account that my grandfather had set up, this trust fund, and saw $1 million in it, I was panicked. And to my mom's point, like, had this sort of whole shift in how I saw myself, especially given the work that I was doing in community activism and for a local nonprofit. And I also think there was this panic when we started having conversations because suddenly I felt like, are we at odds with each other? Like that was sort of my initial feeling. And then what I just did recently, and we can get into this in a second, but I looked back at a lot of email exchanges that my mom and I had during this time because we both do really express ourselves through writing, and was just noticing how much love we both had for each other in these conversations, even though I think both of us were experiencing this big upheaval because suddenly, Mom, you were like, wait, my child's stability and security is coming into question. And I was like, wait, my mom raised me to like want to live on a farm and have to spend like all this money to maintain a certain lifestyle. And now she's telling me not to give it away. Also, I was 23. So I was just coming out of college, didn't have a sense really of what financial precarity could look like, which was another privilege of actually having a class privileged childhood. Was like we weren't ever in a place where I had to think about wanting or needing things. And that I think was a place that we had to start to come more together, was this piece around realism and like, what does it cost to live in this world? And what does it cost to be safe? And can you do that at the same time that you're trying to advocate and put action behind your values? When we first started talking about this, actually, Mom, I wonder if you want to share your story of in whatever year it was, talking to your financial advisors about divesting from fossil fuels, because that was also ahead of its time. So I think the investment conversation also didn't start with me. And that was something that I learned as we got deeper into this work together.
First, I was thinking about, I could see the panic in Susanna. She's not a person who gets rattled easily. So I think it's obviously rattled me to see her respond in this way to something I felt like was a good thing. I'm like, this is a good thing. And I didn't see the disruption for her life in the same way that she was feeling it. I felt like it wasn't at odds with the social justice work that she was doing. And instead, I kept feeling like, oh, it's going to make you more secure to do the work that you want to do. So it really was a journey also for me to understand more how hard this was for her and to stop imposing my perspective on her. And yeah, so that was a big lesson for me in listening and having a better understanding of why this was so hard for her when I really, as the parent, was hoping to set her up for security and supporting her in the work that I really believed in that she was doing.
Yeah. And I've experienced this myself when I tell people, or when I'm going to have my partner on the show soon. And we had our own moments of like, whoa, you want to do this? That's crazy. What are you talking about? So it reminds me a lot of like when we come and share this like vulnerable idea with the people that we love and like wanting to be really accepted and held and supported. And then it's like, and we live in late stage capitalism. Like, do you know that life is expensive? Yeah. So I'm wondering, Annie, especially like going back to that panic, and thank you, Susanna, for sharing like what that was like for you. Can you share a little bit about what were the stories that you were telling yourself and where did that panic come from? And one of the reasons I ask is because usually I've found in my own experience and in working with clients, it comes from a place of love and a place of care.
Well, I was also thinking on Susanna's comment about making my own choices with my investments. And so I had some firsthand knowledge of what it means to take a little departure from your family and stand on your own beliefs and make a choice with your money that's aligned with that belief, that's different from, whatever the status quo in your family may be. When my dad did that first distribution while he was still alive, I met with the investment house and I asked to have all my money removed from energy stocks. The response that I got from the banker was, but you'll be making less money than your brothers. And there was a moment of panic in me about, oh my God, I'm making less money than my brothers. That's a bad thing. But then, taking a deep breath, I thought, how much money do I really need? And we'd been living a long time in Vermont, so I had a pretty good idea of what we did need and how much I needed to support my family.
I'm wondering, actually, in response to Jordan's other question, if Mommy could scroll down to some of the excerpts I found from our email exchanges in 2021. And because this was the summer that I decided I was coming to Mom, telling her that I was starting to give away portions of this trust and what my vision for that money was. And there was just a few places that I see us kind of speaking the same way, but it's cool to know that in the height of that, we were really trying to still meet each other in the middle. So there's this piece from August 2021 that you wrote about that piece of realism.
Would you both be open to actually like reading these emails out loud, like in your own voice? I think that would be really cool to hear.
So in August 2021, I wrote Susanna an email. And in it, I wrote, I hesitate that I put my fears on you about keeping a safety net, but I also feel it's not simply fears, but lived experience, and you're making adult choices, and it's appropriate to share with you concerns. It doesn't mean I doubt your capabilities or that I don't think what you are doing is right and wonderful. I think the fear and the pride, the uncertainty and certainty can exist together. It's uncomfortable and it's balanced, and they don't cancel each other, but consider each other. Celebrate the gifts, what we can do with this one wild and glorious life, Mary Oliver asks. And of course, you're doing just that and using your wealth to make the world a better place for others. Also, accept that you are more than the money.
And then in response to that, and to this point of how sort of tumultuous that summer was for me emotionally, I wrote, just reading this now after a very stressful morning and crying again, because I am so, so grateful to be in this journey with you and to be able to talk and have you actually listen. And I want you to know that the emotion is coming from so many places. Wrapped up in a deep sense of responsibility to do good with what feels like unearned power. But to be honest, a lot of that is fear about the implications of a decision that might put me at odds with a lot of our family and unable to lean into certain aspects of a lifestyle I realize I've taken for granted. It's scary, and I don't take that lightly. But also, at this point, I can't imagine not following through, or at least I don't think I would forgive my future self for not taking my present self seriously. I think I also felt jarred in that conversation because it shocks me when our values seem at odds, that I feel like so much of myself has been formed by you and in direct response to the decisions you made in your life and how to raise your children. And I am a result of a childhood on a farm in rural, beautiful Stratford, Vermont, with a stay-at-home dad and a miniature donkey and a 10-person class.
It's a gift to be able to travel among many worlds is also what I'm saying. Lean into your beliefs as you are, and also lean into your gifts and honor what sustains you because it helps you to function in the world. Embrace it all. And I've witnessed people have exceptional adventures with little money and lots of willpower and passion to do it. You certainly have that passion. Where you challenged me about why it was important for me to have a better understanding of Central Mesa and Milk with Dignity, I too challenge you for both of this dialogue and introspection sharpens and inspires. I really value our conversations, and it's going to take us both time and steps to move along the lives we want. I'm living the life I want, and yet I learn more about myself and my process and my influence and my world every day. And part of the journey is bringing others along with us to heal the divisiveness. I always want to hear from you and be in this life and change and choices and challenges with you. Love you enormously.
Oh, so good. And thank you both so much. I mean, that's really vulnerable to share those exchanges. And just thank you for sharing that with the audience. I mean, I'm really amazed you both were able to kind of go from what might have felt at the time like separate paths and then move towards each other and stay together in your journey as this journey is continuing to unfold even now. And even in those emails, I can see the softening and the moving towards each other. So can you just share a little bit more? I would love to hear from both of you. Maybe I'll start with Susanna first this time. How did you start moving towards each other. And I heard earlier, like, there was research, there was like thought through strategies from Susanna, spreadsheets. How did you start trying to engage your mom and bringing her on your side? And then Annie, I have the same question for you.
Well, it was easy to engage her. I didn't have to try for that. She was definitely ready. And I think actually something we've talked more about recently is the fact that the conversations we started having, and then we actually brought my grandmother into as well, who's my namesake, Susanna, we were breaking this cycle of silence around money in our family for women. So there wasn't a lot of space for women to engage with the men in our family when it came to business, investment decisions, lifestyle budgeting. Like there was this veil. And I think I didn't even sense that until I started engaging with mom because we were having those conversations. So to me, it was like, oh, this is part of a parent-child relationship. And then I started to realize that, Mom, you'd had a different experience as the only daughter in your family. So that point around engagement, I think we were both hungry for, and also already had this way that we did engage with each other over big concepts and around ideas. And we shared our writing, and Mom would read my high school English books with me so that we could talk about them. Like we've had this desire to be thought partners with each other for my whole life. And I had really placed myself in narratives of extremes of like, I have to either give all this away all this money, or I fall into this super passive, self-indulgent lifestyle. And I don't want to be that. So that means I have to swing this other way. And I started to realize through our conversations that there was a way to find balance and to be more nuanced and more intentional and to factor in myself and to bring along my family. And that also you cannot be pure when it comes to relating to money in this world, period. And so I had to choose like what my story around this money was. And it could be this is, extractive. This is just too dark for me to want to engage with the history that comes with any form of wealth. Or I could say, this is an opportunity to really grow and evolve how I have seen my family engage with wealth. And that includes all the departures that mom had already made and all the conversations we were starting to have. And I didn't want to lose family relationships for taking a moral high ground at age 23. And I just made that commitment to myself, I think.
I love what Susanna says about sort of speaking into the silent space and the family and the gender roles. That's very true. I did grow up surrounded by all men, and going to a boarding school also was a very specific paradigm. And I think the challenge for me that also featured in the softening was she's one step removed from my dad. And so she has a little more distance in that relationship. He became sick and died when she was pretty young. So she hadn't forged much of a relationship with him. And I was very grateful for my father's generosity. And I had so much admiration for his ability to be self-made and the fact that he was abandoned twice by his mother. The first time, he didn't meet his mother till he was 5 years old because of World War II. He was shipped over to the U.S. to live with his grandparents. So he spent his formative years raised by his grandparents. And he never was one to feel that was a hardship. He was only one to strive and take care of family. So by telling the money story over and over, which is this big thing, apparently, in resource generation and all these other cohorts that Susanna has invited me to show up for, was an amazing healing tool to find my way to tell that story that honored the man and made me find myself in that story, to rethink my relationship with money, that I had more control over it than I realized. So the money story connected me to my dad and to my ancestry, but also served to connect me to this future and my kids and what I saw their direction that they were going in and how I could support them. Because above all, I'm a mom and I am going to be behind my kids 100% plus. So that was an amazing journey to tell that story and find at first how painful it was, and then realize how healing and how mission oriented and active it was. Thanks, Susanna, for that.
I just did an interview recently with David Cobb, and he was talking about how mentors can be of any and all ages, even those younger than us. And so I think I'm like picking up on mentorship bottom up from Susanna to you, and maybe hopefully one day y'all to the rest of your extended family.
When Susanna spoke about gender, also, and I'm talking about taking control and taking back my own power around money and making different choices, there are so many more networks. Maybe they've always been there, but Susanna's introduced me to them, and I'm finding my way and discovering the Solidaire Network, the Vermont Women's Investor Network, that have brought me in touch with these like-minded people, but also have given more of a pathway for women to act on their beliefs. I think that intention for us has been there all along. We have been PTA members, we've been school board members, we've been community members in so many ways, and often the backbone of many communities and what gets things done in small town Stratford. The men are in there too, but it is a powerful group of women that makes things happen here and keeps things running. So to start to see ways to deliver on that on a bigger scale has been just empowering for me, because they're not networks that I was aware of before this moment in time. And there's a lot more support, there are a lot more options, and there are a lot more modeling of how we want to be in relationship to money, how much more we want to give away and stretch ourselves for what we believe in, and thinking about what is enough, and realizing that thinking about the relationship between money and what is enough is much more in our hands.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you about being in Solidaire, and I think there's something really special about being in community with people grappling with the same types of questions, the same types of process. Maybe it's different, but there's parts of the journey that are pretty similar in some ways. I have a few follow-up questions for you about that. But the first one, and this could be in relation to being in those communities and also in relation to Susanna starting to talk to you about the choices that she wanted to make. It's a question for both of you. When you came into this work, think of the first moment maybe you thought about what would it look like to totally redistribute all of this money? What beliefs did you have coming into this work? Or phrased another way, like what perspective were you coming with? What beliefs had you been socialized around? And what have you unlearned, or how has that perspective shifted over time? Annie, I'll open it up for you first, or whichever one of you feels called to answer first.
I really saw my parents modeling civic engagement, the energy crisis of the 70s. Our family put solar panels on our roof. I think my mom worked on the Conservation Commission in town, has been very involved with helping farmers have better business plans and more support for the work they're doing. So I think those threads are still very much involved in the work that I do. A difference is this idea of late stage capitalism, a feeling that this acceleration that we see with climate harm and wealth disparity, it's real and you can't unsee it now. And that has encouraged me to look to other solutions. And having owned a tack shop in a small town, and I moved the tack shop to a more trafficked area to increase business, I knew firsthand how hard it is to survive in a small economy. And so in recent years, I've become more involved in exploring hybrid models of ownership, the balance having nonprofit ownership with combined and collaborating with private enterprise. And I think that for me, I'm really examining breaking down structures to find more equitable and sustainable ways to do business. A lot of the redistribution, I maybe define it a little differently than Susanna's generation. I believe in stretching ourselves, in increasing what sort of that payout is within our personal budgets. But I also feel like we've created a society that is dependent upon philanthropy, and so many of the teachers and farmers and artists that I consider integral to community and are the truth tellers and the meaning makers and the ones putting the food on the table live in an economy that they can't make a living. I don't have answers, but I'm very much with Susanna and my other kids about breaking down these structures, finding the cracks, and figuring out some other ways to support it. It's going to be a slow step process. I think that it has to be slow in my books to make sure that these groups that we've been supporting for so long continue to be sustainable. We can't sunset every charitable organization. If this generation gives away more funds, and what's it going to be like for the next generation? And maybe I need to trust that process too. And I'm not quite there yet, but I'm really thinking of the 7 generations down the line and what's the world we want to see. We want to see more wealth distribution. We want to see less disparity between the classes. We want to see farmers not going under, or we want to see farmers be able to repair their barns. Right now is just this time where I'm learning and experimenting. We're going to make mistakes, but we're also going to find out some beautiful things. We're going to find some inspiring ways to move forward together.
And I think a huge part of it is your bravery, but also our collective decision to openly share this messiness. And I think that's what I think of with the question of what narratives of wealth did you inherit, is that there is this big history of civic mindedness and philanthropy and community engagement. And that was a very separate conversation than where the money came from, where it lived, how it was earned. And now I see us blending that conversation to be able to show up and say, we are connected to resources and we have these levels of privilege that allow us to support philanthropy, that made me as a 25-year-old be able to come to a donor site visit and say, I don't want there to be a power dynamic here because I inherited wealth that I now want to pass through to you. So let's talk about it. Let's not make this weird silent hierarchy that exists. This conversation we're having right now is an active example of, Mom, you taking my invitation to share the messiness and hope that can be helpful to our peers that are trying to navigate this space too, to say, we're talking about it and we're not trying to keep this piece around having access to privilege and having access to money and financial resources, specifically at a moment when we have this convergence of all these different crises in the world, a lot of them caused by how financial systems have impacted this planet. And so we're going to talk about it. And we're going to say, like, we are moving money for that reason, and we're questioning structures because of that reason. And I just think that that's the model that we are putting for the next generations of our family, and I feel really proud of.
I just agree. It's clear, it's the harm is so visible. And I don't know how you can sit in this harm and not want to take action. Susanna and I have talked about this a lot, that we're not rebelling against previous generations. There has been, this concern to to sit with the harm and look for solutions throughout our ancestry. There's urgency to do more, and that's what we're responding to, the doing more, and maybe doing it a little bit differently, whether it's hybrid models in our local communities or bigger commitments of pledges, or asking ourselves, what do I truly need? What is enough? And then not locking up that money in, whether it's public markets. I mean, in our family, nobody yet that I know of has shipped money off to the Cayman Islands, but it's a little deplorable that that's an option for people, and finding ways to hide wealth so that we're not taxed on our assets, we're taxed on an income, and that we're hiding that income. I think that we don't want to be complicit in that. Susanna, quick, jump in.
And that was our first step in opening the visibility of the work that we're doing. Was Mom and I together signed a public letter to impose a wealth tax in Vermont. And that was a scary conversation for us to have because it's a tiny state. I grew up in the town that Mom still lives in. That's a very tiny town. And to say, we're here, we're rich, and we want you to tax us is a big statement. And also, it felt like this continuation of our journey to say, okay, there is this philanthropic legacy in our family, but you can't just rely on individuals deciding that they want to give up a certain amount and still having the power to say where it goes. That belongs in the hands of the government, whether or not we agree with how the government is wielding that power. But still, taxes are the system that has been put in place to provide a social net. So that's, I think, taking this conversation to a collective level.
And also, getting back to where we began with place-based, we're all committed to these places. We're not moving to a state that has no income tax. There are people leaving in droves states that are actually passing wealth taxes, and we've been a family that stays put. I've seen that with my family of origin, and all our families are committed to the place that we live. And I wanted to underscore that that's a little bit of an ethos. Am I committed to the making of money and the business of money, or am I committed to this community that I live in and using the resources available to me to strengthen the community that I'm in and bring others up as best I can?
Yes. Thank you. And thank you both for going deeper and deeper into that. That was really cool. I'm going to shift the conversation in just a second to a few more questions that I have related to what we were talking about around enoughness. I think what you brought up too speaks to how important, of course, what you're doing is amazing, to think about giving and redistributing more, doing more community and solidarity economy investments. As much as I want this to be true, I don't believe that we can build the future that we want without more collective action and without campaign work and really addressing the systemic issues. Even what you were speaking to, Annie, I also agree. If we sunset all philanthropy tomorrow, I don't necessarily think that automatically our world shifts, because we need to build the new at the same time that we're resisting the bad and trying to transform philanthropy and transform how wealth is redistributed, while also building in democratic governance mechanisms and ways to have that hyper local place-based decision-making and governance. It's a lot of how I think about revolution versus reform. It's actually, we need them both. I wish we could just say this one day will happen and everything changes, but we only bring what we know. And if we've been socialized one way, we can't automatically change everything about our society the next day. So just makes me think a lot about that, and about the Band-Aid solutions that a lot of philanthropy addresses, and how that needs to be transformed too. If what the 5% that comes out of a DAF is invested in Wall Street, we're certainly not fixing those problems. And so holding that contradiction. So thank you both so much for bringing up all of those things. So I am curious, Annie, how do you think about safety and security? I heard you bring in the 7 generations principle that's from Indigenous wisdom. How do you think about safety and security as it relates to how much is enough for yourself and also for the people you love, like Susanna and those future generations that will come within your family legacy?
Well, they need a planet to live on. So I feel it's pretty important to be looking at renewable energy and to be regulating hunting and fishing. And we need to live in that gray area a little bit more of finding ways to allow species to rebound. I want the future generations to see what I see when I go to Alaska and to see a healthy orca and humpback whale population. I feel very strongly about not drilling in our parks, not selling our mineral rights. And, we have so much genius in this country that maybe needs to be incentivized for more solutions to solve some of these issues around energy and stewardship. I've become involved with the land back relearning journey and learning about sovereignty and native relationship with the land. It is just so important to hear more narratives and other stories because clearly narrowing our vision to a single perspective is not healthy for climate. We live in a state that's really dependent upon its natural resources. So the past 2 years, we've had severe flooding that has been really catastrophic for farmers. And we see it in Alaska. We spend time there with the fishing industry, but we also see how quickly things rebound when we shift our caretaking practices and when we shift our perspective and we apply some money to the solutions. I feel strongly about climate justice as well. For myself, I also have lots of spreadsheets like Susanna, working out my own budget, how much I need, how much I want to pass on to my children. I do feel it is a huge advantage to have school paid for and to have assistance buying your first home. And I know that's a privilege, but I want that for future generations as well. If I spend down everything, maybe in service for the planet, that's justified, but I also feel that I need to do work in service of those future generations. So it's just a balancing act a bit. And it's questions I ask myself all the time that I'm still working to clarify. How much is enough? What's my responsibility for social justice, planet justice, systemic racism? I feel very committed to more equity, and I also feel very committed to future generations of children if I'm so lucky to have them, but all children, it scares me, the divisiveness, the lack of compassion and empathy and the lack of curiosity that is so prevalent in relating to each other right now.
What I'll add is what I'm hearing you say is widening this idea of safety and security beyond family of origin. So thinking creatively about how the wealth that we have access to can move through the world in a way that creates stability for others, even if then ultimately it can come back into the biological family. So say you want to make sure that there is money for a next generation in our family to be able to have education paid for. But what is that money doing in the meantime? Does it have to stay in public markets? Does it have to be tied in these corporations that are deteriorating everything we value? Speaking for ourselves, I guess. Or is there a way that that money can actually also circulate and create a platform for other communities, individuals to build wealth, to start businesses, to have an education fund? And that's where this creativity around what investments look like, what long-term loans look like, what is enough, not only being what do I need to hold on to, but how much profit, how much interest do I need to earn off my investments? Is it okay that it's only going to be 0 to 1% if that money can still come back? And then we can decide again what happens with it. So those are questions we talk about a lot too. And it creates more of a timeline for us to say our investments look different and will give us another opportunity to assess how they are used 3 to 10 years down the line.
Well said. Joy, she's so eloquent.
All the reading you made me do as a child.
There's little steps that we can do right now that increasing foundation payout to 6%, that's 1% difference. But if everybody did it, if foundations, if private portfolios took up 10 to 20%, in Susanna's case, 100%, but of their money and invest it in community funds and housing trusts. And these are not big sacrifices, and they're right at our fingertips, and they would all make an enormous difference.
Or even if you put money into some type of philanthropic legal structure, it can't be invested in extractive industries or something. That's another systemic change that's possible. The last question I really want to ask you both, and you're starting to speak to it, so I'm very excited to pull on this thread. How do you see the role that you both are playing being connected to making systemic change happen? The Vermont wealth tax that you were speaking about, that's one way that I see you both engaging in that area. Can you just share a little bit more about how you view your role beyond the individual actions and what you would hope for from the collective work that you're doing?
I'll start. What's coming to mind is that I think personal change is the foundation of structural change and of cultural change, and just our ability to have this conversation and the invitation I think I want other people to see in how mom and I and my dad and my siblings and how our family has really come together to think about our responsibility and our privilege has been tough at times, but it's also been extremely joyful because I think it's brought us closer. It's put us in alignment with each other. It's given us adult relationships with each other. And the power of just leaning into that is something that has really strengthened our relationships and made us that much more excited to then extend our privileges and extend our resources and show up in our community in a way that we're doing together. So I think that's what I see happening both in the collective way of, yes, advocacy, yes, philanthropy, yes, wealth redistribution, and also, yes, just like loving other humans and choosing the people that you want to be in allyship and relationship with, and how to mentor each other across generations, be open to learning from all ends. I think we've both mentored each other in different ways, and that's been really powerful.
I also want to bring up my mother's father. He lived next door to me growing up, John Lawrence. He was a remarkable man. He lived till he was 97. What to me makes him remarkable was his curiosity and his listening. To go and have a conversation with him, he would ask you questions from his perch of 90 years on the planet. He wasn't instructing or telling or, he was always fascinated in the other person and wanting to understand that other person. And that was just an incredible modeling of humanity for me. And I feel like, yes, all the things Susanna said resonate and are so true. We're not going to get anywhere if we're not listening to each other, if we're not seeing the potential and the humanity with each other. And like you said earlier, Jordan, collective action, the best way to bring people along is to inspire them and welcome them to come in and join the circle and not punish because we're all doing the best we can with what we have. And I think we know more now than my great grandfather who had a coal mine, and that, of course, is a whole nother subject, but he did the best he could at the time and ran an operation he really believed in. And now, knowing what we know, I think we all have a contract with humanity to take what we've learned and really consider how we're applying that, and just to be curious and empathetic.
And as Susanna shared the last time we did an interview together, people might surprise you. And I have family members who we do not see eye to eye politically. And I'm making an intentional choice to not throw them away because they might be capable of changing their mind later, or what I'm modeling might resonate with them in some way, shape, or form. So thank you for bringing that back to the center. And I will wrap us up and leave you both with one final question, which is, if you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish that listeners of the show already knew about? Or is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
One thought that I had that I shared earlier with you, Jordan, was this quote from Gus Speth, who's a Stratford neighbor and was the founder of the Natural Resources Defense Fund and a Yale professor. And he says the only thing he ever said or wrote that's gone viral is the following: I used to think the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we lawyers and scientists don't know how to do that. That quote gives me hope for creatives. It gives me hope for your generation. You really are a spark that is igniting the rest of us. And I'm just so grateful for both of you and your willingness to engage on difficult topics and to do such noble work with such respect and care. So just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.